Hi, everyone. We hope you're taking care of yourselves and your families right now during this pandemic. We know there's also an incredible amount of uncertainty for your business and your workforce during this time of disruption. That's why I'm here with Brian Kropp, who's Chief of Research for Gartner's HR practice. And he is here to talk about how to manage your workforce during times of disruption and give us some insights and advice about what's going on for you right now as a business leader. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Heather.
So, Brian, why don't we start? Can you give us just an overall framing of how leaders should be thinking about the work environment right now?
Yeah, with everything that's happened, there's been three distinct phases that organizations have gone through so far. The first phase was just a pure health and safety phase. That this virus came along relatively quickly, pretty much unplanned for. And the first response was health and safety, get employees out of the buildings, make sure if they're in the buildings that they're washing their hands, there's things to keep clean and so on. Then there was the second phase, which is, and this is where most companies still are, which is now that people are out of the buildings and working from home, how do we actually get remote work to work? And there's a lot of questions and a lot of challenges associated with that. And then there's a third phase that some companies are starting to move into, which is if our revenues are down or if there's employees that aren't able to work remotely, what do we do from a compensation perspective? How do we think about managing our compensation strategies in a way that primarily makes sure that we're helping our employees, but also manages against the financial realities of our business? And so companies are in some version of those three phases, depending upon where they're located and what's going on with them.
Right. And also their size, right?
Yeah.
Depending on your size, you may or may not have had a remote work policy. We also
Mhm.
had research that not all companies had it yet, and we're going to need it when Gen Z started coming into the workforce. So, how should they be thinking about remote work in terms of compensation and benefits
Sure.
and performance goals and productivity goals? So many people are scrambling. Should I be changing all of these things during this time of disruption?
Yeah, the reality is that there's a lot of companies that either didn't have an official work remote policy, work from home policy, or it was very ad hoc or it was very informal from that perspective. And a mistake that some companies are trying to do is right now to define the exact details and contours of what the remote work policy should be. It's a little bit too late to be doing that because it's already happened and employees are already working remote. So the question is, now that you've got employees that are working remote, how do you make sure they can actually get stuff done? The first thing that you need to be looking at and thinking about is, do your employees actually have the technology that they need to be successful? And that technology is more than just a laptop and a cell phone. While those are necessary, they're not sufficient. You also have to make sure that your VPN is capable of handling all the bandwidth that's there, that they've got right quality cameras to enable effective video conferencing. You need to make sure that their at-home internet access is robust enough and their Wi-Fi networks at home are robust enough to handle the additional capacity and load that's on there. So first, you want to make sure they've got the right tools and infrastructure from a technology perspective to be able to work. Secondly, what you want to make sure is that your employees and managers know the right way to communicate in a virtual environment. Well, there's a lot of similarities and things that map from the workplace to a virtual workplace. There's a lot of things that are different. So, for example, how do you think about communicating when you don't have body language to see what's going on? How do you become intentional about making sure that interactions are occurring when you don't have the serendipity of just bumping into someone to talk with them? How do you make sure that team meetings can still occur and so on? So there's a lot of communication that needs to be put in place to coach managers and employees on how to work effectively in a remote environment. And then third, I would say, is that there's been a lot of focus on how do you improve manager and employee interactions and communications to work in a remote environment. But what we've also found is increasingly work is done more peer to peer rather than manager to employee. So you also have to think a lot about how do you make those employee to employee relationships work in a way that the peers can talk to each other, the teams can work with each other, and that workflows can still occur and move across the organization. That's a third thing that's really critical to get right to make sure that remote work can actually work for most employees.
Right. And so a number of organizations are scrambling to make sure that they have all of those collaboration tools and all the technology in place. Hopefully they've been working on that. I know we've been advising around the digital workplace for some time, but now really more important than ever. So let me ask you, some of the other areas that employees are struggling with, even on my team. Two full-time working parents, they're at home, they're working from home, 2-year-old. Okay, that is not an easy situation. So how are some organizations dealing with this?
Yeah, what's different in this situation compared to others is that, and we're going to the mental model that people have been using, which isn't the right one, is to say, well, it's just like a snow day when people are working from home, and so you should treat it just like a snow day. It's not just a snow day. A snow day usually lasts for 1 or 2. You can have the kids go outside and play with the neighbors and do those sorts of things. And it's for a limited period of time. But it's clear that this is going to be an extended period of time, weeks, months, something along those lines. And schools are closed, so you've got parents with kids at home. And even if they don't have kids at home, they might have a spouse that is sick that they have to take care of, or parents that they have to take care of, or a variety of other things that limit their ability to be fully focused on work-related things from 8:30 to 5:30 in a traditional workday sort of environment. So what you have to do as a manager or leader is stop thinking about the world as the processes and activities that your employees engage in. And are they doing the right processes and activities? Instead, you need to think about it, are they just accomplishing the outcomes that you need them to accomplish? Are they getting things done? And you have to trust them that they're going to do it in the way that makes the most sense for them. So as a manager or leader, you have to stop paying attention to the process and just pay more attention to, are things getting done? And if that means they're getting done late at night, at different time periods, whatever it might be, that is completely okay. But you have to shift from processes to outcomes from that perspective. Now,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Now there's a reality, which is you still need to have people come together and be able to work in some ways. So what we're seeing some companies do is to try to create an idea that employees should have office hours, so that from 10 to 12 or 12 to 2 or whatever it is, that your employees communicate to their manager and they work out some sort of compromise about when they will be available. So if their manager really needs to talk to them, they've got that hour or 2 hour window every day where they're going to be the person that's online. But outside of that, it's just as long as they get back to me in some sort of reasonable time, that's what you have to work with. But you have to focus on outputs, not inputs, create narrow windows where there's expectations, and outside of that, just realize it's going to be a very flexible and fluid situation going forward.
That's actually really helpful tactical advice for how to think about productivity, because there is this general sense of fear of, what if I can't be as productive? Do I have to change my goals? How do I manage this? But that's very helpful, even for the situation on my team, which is to maintain an expectation that a parent of young children needs to be available from 9 to 5, when they used to be able to do that when they had full-time childcare, may not be realistic. When someone says, look, I'm working early mornings or during nap time or late at night, they can be productive then and set office hours for other certain windows. Everyone is adapting, right?
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. Okay, how then also does the environment shift a more traditional manager-employee relationship? Because I think that this also leads to that, because there's some natural shifting that takes place when employees are asking for things that they might have not have been able to ask for before, but makes sense for them to be most productive and for everything to move along smoothly in this chaotic environment.
Yeah, the best thing that you can do as a manager right now is suspend disbelief and just put utmost trust in your employees. You have got a moment where you just need to believe them for whatever they're asking for, whatever their situation is, and have trust and confidence in them that they're going to do the right thing. And if they don't, there'll be time once this is all said and done that our performance management processes can kick in and we can solve that problem later. But for now, you just have to have that trust and faith in them. And the vast majority of employees want to do the right thing. They want to help out. They want to be productive. They care about their employer. They realize things are going on and they're going to lean in from that perspective if they're given the right structure to make that happen. And that structure in terms of the manager-employee relationship, as mentioned, it's about trust, it's about outputs, not inputs. But there's a couple of other factors there as well that are really important. One, as a manager, you have to encourage people to take appropriate risks and to try new things and be willing to innovate. And as you're having that conversation with your employees, say, just try something new. And if it works, that's great. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. Because there's a natural hesitancy of employees during disruptive times where they're afraid to try something new. And we've all been forced into trying new things, all forced into new ways of working. And you want to encourage that innovation and that experimentation and let employees know that it's okay to do that. The other thing that becomes really important right now, uh, as employees and managers don't see each other on an ongoing basis, as employees are starting to wonder, does my manager actually know what I'm doing, is the importance of recognition. During periods of disruption, employees' desire for being recognized for the contributions that they're making increases by about 30%. So as a manager, what you need to do is identify what it is that your employees are doing and the contributions they're making, and then thank them for it. Recognize the contributions that they're making. And what's really important during this time period is that emotional relationships and emotional engagement between an employee and their manager and their company are not defined during periods of stability and predictability. They're defined during periods of disruption. And if you build those emotional connections by trusting them, focusing on outcomes, not inputs, by recognizing them for the contributions that they're making, by encouraging them to innovate and experiment, once this is over and done with, and that will happen at some point, those employees will be so much more engaged for the long haul with you as a manager in the organization that they work for. But during this time period, if we do those four things and have our managers do those four things, we're likely to maintain productivity now, but then improve retention and productivity once this is all said and done.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. There's another element that some industries and some types of companies are dealing with more than others, which gets into some ethical areas on paid sick leave and when some of that isn't supported. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, if you do the comparison back to the 2008, 2009 global financial crisis, that was a financial crisis that created a humanitarian crisis because a lot of companies went out of business, and that impacted a lot of people. This is at its heart a humanitarian crisis first that has the potential to create a financial crisis. But if you look at the root cause of what's going on, it gives you a different way to think about how to respond to it. What is happening is that there's a lot of employees who aren't able to work, or because their stores, their restaurants, their hotels, their airlines are effectively shut down, are not able to work, or there's not customers to buy that product or service. And in the past, what employers would have done when these situations occurred is just furlough those employees or lay them off and just make a purely financial decision that's associated with that. In this environment, that might not be the right way to think about it for a variety of reasons. First, there's a different relationship that employers are trying to build with their employees, which is treating them as stakeholders, looking out for them for the long haul. A lot of companies have spent the last couple of years of building a set of values that describe how much they care about their employees, how it's important for them to create great lives and experiences for their employees, not just to make more money. And given we spent all the time and energy building that, if at the first moments we go to cost cutting by reducing employee headcount, that's going to destroy all of the credibility that we've built up until this point to try to make that happen. And then second, most economists agree that this won't be a long, extracted, multi-year problem, but it'll be a deep, severe, relatively short to medium-term problem. So again, measured in months, most likely. But what happens if you lay everyone off now, when the economy comes back, then you're going to have to hire all those people again. And it's actually expensive to lay people off because you have to have severance. It's very disruptive. It hurts your reputation. And then to hire all those people back, it's again really expensive. Recruiters have to spend time doing that. You have empty seats. Once an employee shows up for work, you then have to train them and they're not productive for many months. And so the calculus behind should you decrease the workforce now is very different than we saw in 2008, 2009. You have to think about your reputation, the relationships, the experiences, the values you've been building, the shutdown cost and the startup cost. And that calculus is leading companies to not actually decrease headcount for the most part, but to come up with a variety of other innovative strategies to be able to continue to pay their employees, even if it's at the cost of the financial health of the company. And that's a different framework that we're seeing companies use this time compared to previous recessionary events.
Got it. Okay, I want to go back to something you said earlier, which was about how there isn't really body language when you're not interacting so much in person. I mean, maybe, like if I get my hands up here, I can talk with my hands, but not everybody can do that on screen. Yeah. Not everybody's comfortable talking on video. And there's a lot more video sharing. Not everyone has equipment. People are in different circumstances. So do you have recommendations for training on virtual body language, or ways that might be perceived as negative or positive or anything along those lines?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are going on there. And it's about communication and connection on a variety of fronts. You're right that there's some people that don't like being on video, and you've got a call and they always turn their video off. There's definitely people that do that. There's also other people that avoid it at all costs and would just rather email back and forth. The problem with all of these sorts of things is that you miss out on a lot of the nuances that are associated with language and interactions and posture and all those sorts of things. So one, what we're really encouraging companies to do is coach their managers and their employees on how to talk differently in a video environment or an online environment versus in person. And some of that, again, is very tactical. So for example, if you're emailing back and forth and you can't get to a resolution on something, after 4 emails, you have to pick up the phone and call someone, or turn on your laptop and video chat with them. But you have to change the nature of the communication. 2, what they're also doing, especially employees that aren't comfortable with some of the newer communication technologies like instant messaging and so on, is that they're providing guidance to their employees about what should you talk about what sort of conversation makes sense to have via video, what makes sense via email, what makes sense via instant messaging. So providing guidance to them about what type of tool makes the most sense in what type of conversation. And then the other thing that we're doing is reminding people that video conferencing is an in-person meeting, and the environment that you have around you, the look that you've got when you're talking with someone, that you shouldn't be checking your email while you're actually engaging in the video conference, much like it'd be rude to put your phone in front of your face and check your email on your phone when you're talking to someone in person. But really trying to communicate to employees and managers that video is in person, and you should adopt all the same approaches that you'd have as an in-person conversation that you would in a video one. And what will happen through time is that everyone will start to get more comfortable with these technologies, when to use them and how to use them. And that is true across all the different generations in the workplace. But it'll take a little bit of time, a little bit of coaching. And what we also need to encourage our managers and employees is that it's going to be messy for a while. And that messy is okay. You're going to have situations where someone's kid walks in the middle of a video conference with a customer. It's going to happen. You just have to be accepting that it's going to be a little bit messy for a while. And what we've heard from all the companies that we've talked to is that employees realize that, they're comfortable with that, customers realize that, they're comfortable with that. It's just going to be the new normal for the next couple of months.
One thing about this situation in particular is that we're all globally in the same situation, which my memory hasn't happened before. It sounds as though companies shouldn't take for granted that their employees know how to use these different technologies and know how to behave, and it really helps to give them some guidance. So that's very helpful. So we did have a question come in on social media about how companies are tackling recruitment and the candidate experience during this time, from pre-start logistics to start date timing and virtual onboarding to accelerate new hire performance.
Yeah, so there's a lot of companies that are still hiring right now, even with all of the news and all the concerns. The majority of companies are actually still hiring. And even companies that have put in hiring freezes have put them in for most of their employees, but not their employees in critical roles. So those are the mission critical jobs that organization needs to continue to operate. So most companies are still hiring to some degree. And what they've done with their hiring process is move as much of that as they possibly can to a virtual experience where the interviews are done via video conference, those sorts of things. Recruiters have largely been fine with that. Where it's become hard is the hiring manager. Most hiring managers still believe that I have to see that person in person in order to make a good decision about them. I have to literally shake their hand to know if this is a person I want to hire. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen for a whole set of reasons. But the challenge that you've got is convincing your hiring managers that you can hire good people that you don't meet in person. And that's kind of the biggest challenge that's there. Once you've hired them, though, you've got another challenge with once they come to work, how do you get them all the tools and equipment and services that they need? When you really look at your processes, there's actually a lot of that can be done in a virtual setting by giving them information, doing it over the intranet, but flipping as much as you can to virtual. And the things that have to be in person, or you might not have the technology or the idea yet on how to make that virtual, you can delay those. And so that's what we're seeing companies do, is getting people on board, giving them as much as they can to be successful, and then just delaying and pushing out as much of the in-person activities as they can. And that seems to be the right balance and the right compromise to make.
Across the board, there is a mindset shift for all of us in so many realms that have to do with this pandemic disruption to our personal lives and our business. And it's something that we're all dealing with. I really appreciate your insights. I think our viewers really appreciate them. Is there anything else that you would like to add in closing as we look out? I know every day seems to bring new information, new situations. Anything else you would want to add?
Yeah, there's two things that I've really been struck by. The first one is we've had a variety of crises and challenges and things that we've seen on all sorts of different fronts within the modern organization. I have never seen companies being more willing to share with us, with their peers, and I've never seen companies be more willing to help out at this point compared to any other time I've seen. When one HR executive that we talked to has figured something out, they call us right away and say, I want to tell other people what I figured out. That sense of community and sharing and helping each other out is amazing. And that gives me an enormous amount of reassurance that we're going to figure this out one way or another. The second question I would posit for executives that they need to start thinking about, and hopefully they have to answer this question sooner rather than later, is that we had a lot of our employees go home and work from home. At some point, we're going to have them come back to work. How are we going to manage the return to work? Because you're going to have some employees that have had the virus potentially and potentially won't be able to get it again. There's other employees who haven't or are going to be concerned about coming back to work. But how do we manage the back to work question? And we'll have a little bit of time to think about that, but we've managed the exit from work to home. We're going to have to manage the entry from home to work. And we're also going to have a lot of employees that were in fact much more comfortable working from home and want to keep working there. But it's going to have a fundamental change in terms of what we think good work looks like, where people can do work, how people can do work. At the end of the day, we're conducting a global pilot on remote work. It's the biggest pilot that has ever occurred on changing how people work. And we're going to learn a lot of lessons from that. It's going to fundamentally change how people work. We just have to be comfortable once they start coming back to work, we take those lessons to heart and start using them.
That's a very important message to end on. Thanks, Brian. We really appreciate your insights. Thanks all of you for watching. Take care. Stay healthy.